This is the High School Football Preview Show with Mike Wennmacher, Tim Schweizer, Steve Bridge, and Derek Parris on 97.7 and 970 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk.
It is the High School Football Preview Show, Week 9. Final week of the regular season. Hard to believe. I'm Mike Wennmacher, joined by the panel, Derek Parris from Channel 1450. You hear him from the SHG broadcast, Tim Schweizer, and from the Rochester Rocket broadcast, Steve Bridge. Before we get to the final week of the season matchups, let's recap Week 8. We had a really epic ball game between SHG and Glenwood. Another Glenwood comeback in the fourth quarter. Almost kind of the same thing that happened at Rochester. So, Tim, let's start with you. SHG seemed to have a pretty good handle on that ball game through three quarters. What was good and what was bad that you saw that led to the ultimate defeat from the Cyclones in that game?
Cyclones defense was very good early in the game, Mike, and they took advantage of field position a couple of times and had ultimately a 24-7 lead early in the fourth quarter. But it was a windy night, and the wind was a factor depending on who had it and who was going into it. And it just looks like with Glenwood's two platoon and all of their strength in that regard of not having a lot of kids play both ways, which Sacred Heart Griffin has many of their players going both ways. I think the Cyclones kind of were gassed in the fourth quarter. I think their coaches were concerned that the defense might have trouble stopping Glenwood in the fourth, so they went for a kill on a couple of key decisions on fourth down, both of which did not work. And Glenwood took advantage, took one from their own 10-yard line, went 90 yards on a great touchdown drive. And then the other happened on the Sacred Heart Griffin in the fourth quarter with the Cyclones up by 10 points. They went for a first down on 4th and 1 at their own 29, and Glenwood stopped it. And on the first play after possession change, Colton Knadler hit Hugo Lopp on a post pattern unguarded. He ran into the end zone. It was then a 3-point game, and the Cyclones really never stopped that avalanche in the fourth quarter, although they did score late and take a brief lead in the final minute. It was Glenwood's fourth quarter. They won the fourth 28-7, and they won the game 35-31.
What are the positives, though? You mentioned that the Cyclones' defense was playing well. Offensively, what were the Cyclones doing that were able to build that lead, and what can they take away from this particular game?
I think they were very encouraged by the fact that they were able to run the ball a little bit with Mikey Gresh. The passing game was good. Cam Brinkman had to scramble a little to get the passing game in the hands of receivers, but a really good game between Brinkman and Andrew Walters, who caught 9 passes for 105 yards in the game. They took advantage of a couple of miscues by Glenwood, and the breaks kind of went their way for three quarters, but not in the fourth. And so Sacred Heart Griffin definitely, going into the game, I think if you had walked through the Glenwood tailgate, you might have had the betting line at Glenwood winning by 2 scores. They won by 4 points. So the Cyclones can take some solace from that. But I think they flushed it after the weekend review, and their practice focus this week has been on their friends from Rochester for Friday night.
Yeah, we'll get to that ball game here in a bit. Before we get to the Glenwood side, Derek, what did you see in that SHG Glenwood game that really stood out to you?
What a great game it was to listen to and go back and watch Michael's radio call. Because, I mean, when I saw how much he had to put together, it was about 14 minutes of stuff. And, I mean, I'm sure he had to cut some great stuff out because, I mean, you could have probably done a 20-minute video on the fourth quarter alone, just kind of the way it was. But to me, it was just kind of, you take away the sort of calmness from Chatham again, where, I mean, down 24-7 at home on senior night, you're thinking it's panic time because, how to lose to your rivals on your senior night when you have that many seniors, it just that story kind of writes itself in terms of the Duke, North Carolina, rivalry of Coach K's last game and how that goes. So just the way that Chatham was calm, collected, and found a way, they got the stops and, like Tim talked about, that big fourth down stop, I think just threw the momentum way into the favor of the Titans. And then, just the way it went back and forth where Drew Ward makes an incredible catch that, I mean, you just one of those where not many kids make those, but he's just one of those kids that, you saw last year in the baseball run. He makes plays when he has to in those big situations. Same thing with Cam Brickman. So for SHG to really, take the punches and then hit another one, and then they really just ran out of time. It's one of those games where probably the last team with the ball wins, and then they only had so much time left. So to me, Chatham comes away the winner. They win the Central State 8, and then they win the kind of crossover championship. So this team has just found ways to win, and I think that's going to pay dividends, in the postseason when they get into the 6A or 5A playoffs.
Yeah, and from the Glenwood side of things, Tim, you hit upon it. The depth really kind of played a key in it, but also talking to Coach Hay earlier today, he mentioned, these seniors, we've talked about it all year, and because I asked him, what was kind of the message on the sideline, and it was like, hey, we've talked all year about how our seniors are the key to this team. So it's your senior night, do something about it. And they went out and they did that. And as much as it's great to have another comeback win, talking to him about their overall goal going forward, it's nice to have in your back pocket, but not something you want to get accustomed to. And he agreed on that. Need to starting on time on these big games, and we'll see if they can do that this week as they wrap up the regular season against Springfield High. But before we get to the breakdown of that one and SHG Rochester, Steve, let's go to you. You had one that became interesting for a variety of reasons at Rochester Springfield High. Take it from the Rochester perspective. What were the positives coming out of that big victory over the Senators?
I think the positives just simply were, Mike, that it was, again, a pretty good all-around game for the Rockets. Not bad, especially on defense still. Hold the Senators just to 10 points. Late field goal in that game gets it to 55-10 on the Rochester side of things. And so they look pretty good there. Still too many turnovers for the Rocket offense, and that's going to be something that's got to change here week 9 and then week 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 if you get to that point. So I think the Rockets were fairly happy with the way that they played and won that game against Springfield High, but Rochester probably would have much preferred, Mike, to take on a full throttle SHS team as opposed to the one that was pretty hobbled by injury and by just a depleted roster by the time that game was less than halfway through the first half. The roster and the lineup was much different than what the Springfield Senators probably would have loved to have put on the field, and I'm sure the Rockets would have much preferred to have Springfield High's best and take on all the starters that they were expecting to have in the game.
Derek, what have you heard from kind of the Springfield side of that equation in that ball game?
Yeah, I haven't heard a ton, just kind of the fact that, they're trying to get healthy and hope to do that, by the time the playoffs come, because, obviously they wanted a better seed in terms of, going 5-4 like they did last year, and understand that, they ran into East St. Louis then in the first round. But I think that they kind of said, well, it's time to get healthy and see what we can accomplish, because once Rochester kind of got that lead, it kind of felt like, they said, okay, let's turn our attention to trying to get healthy instead. So I think that, that's kind of the takeaway, not knowing a ton about it, but that's just kind of what you have to grasp from it.
Steve, let me ask you, as you enter into week 9 and before we break down the Rochester SHG game, where do you feel for Rochester? Is the defense ahead of the offense? Like, which is gelled as we end into week 9?
I would say the defense is a little bit ahead of the offense right now. It's been the crew. It's been the side of the ball that's probably been the most consistent for Rochester throughout this entire season. What was I going to tell you here, Mike? That they're averaging 49 points on offense, but they're giving up just 18. And so obviously the offense is doing pretty good. But anytime you're all the way through, and especially the meat of the schedule that Rochester has played here so far into week 9, and an incredible matchup here at the end of the regular season, but just to allow 18 points on average to all of those teams, I think the defense is leading things here just a little bit. But the offense isn't far away. But as I mentioned against Springfield High, the Rockets just need to eliminate the turnovers that they've been making on offense, and then all of a sudden kind of quickly pulls that side of the ball up to, just being that much better as you head on to the playoffs.
All right, so let's get into the final week of the season, the matchups. Before we get into the big one, quickly, Glenwood takes on Springfield High. Interesting fact, I was talking to Coach, and obviously before the season you have goals and winning the conference, and they have loftier goals and going undefeated. In fact, he said that wasn't even on their radar. But if they get it done, they will be one of only 3 other Glenwood teams in the history of the program to go undefeated in the regular season. So it will be kind of nice for this team to kind of put a bow on the regular season with the victory at Memorial. It's not going to be easy. I asked Coach about, playing SHG and Cam Brinkman, the athleticism he shows outside the pocket and when things break down, and kind of similar but different to Brody Scheffler. And he said, yeah, that is helpful in the fact we played a somewhat similar quarterback the week before. So Glenwood knows they're going to get the Senators' best shot. It's senior night for them. It's week 9, a lot on the line for the Glenwood Titans. You don't want to go into the playoffs with a loss, but he believes his group is focused, and the fact that they went through a battle with SHG in week 8 would just be that much more helpful for them as they take on the Senators in week 9. So let's get to the marquee matchup, because I know you all 3 are excited for this one and have much to say. So, Tim, let's start with the SHG side of the equation against Rochester. A big opportunity for bounce back after the heartbreak against the Titans.
Yeah, and I think the Cyclones have taken the right attitude this week. And talking to Coach Allison and some players this week, they have said that, yeah, it was a rough Saturday reviewing the video of Friday night's loss at Glenwood, but they've moved on. And they know that Rochester, an arch rival, is on the schedule for Friday night on their home field at Cyclone Stadium. And they want to be ready to play the Rockets, who whipped them by 2 scores last year at Rochester. And Mike, the game is huge in addition to the fact that it's Rochester versus SHG. But SHG does not want to go into the playoffs 6-3. They want to be 7-2. They have a very tough potential draw in the first round if they are 6-3. So it is very important to Sacred Heart Griffin to get a 7th win on Friday night. And I think it might even be more important for Sacred Heart Griffin to go into the playoffs at 7-2 than it would be for Rochester to fall in this game and fall into 7-2, just based on the way other teams in 4A are shaping up. 4A is going to be very tough downstate. 4A may be even tougher upstate. 4A is going to be really difficult. So it's a huge game for playoff implications, if nothing else.
Steve, your thought on what Tim's saying about seeding and about playoff implications for this football game?
100%. Everybody wants to be 9-0, but you can't. Neither of these 2 teams can pull that off right now. But the difference is more substantial between 6-3 and 7-2 than it is 8-1 and 7-2. And like you said, Mike, everybody wants to finish out week 9 a winner. But if the opportunity at 7-2 is far greater, maybe you get a chance even at a round 1 home game, but the draw out of it's just a little bit more, it's just an easier path to begin with. At 6-3, there are a lot of really good teams you can face right away and potentially on the road, quite possibly almost always on the road at 6-3 in that round 1 matchup. And you just want to make things as easy as possible as you can when you head into the postseason. And so that is one sure huge motivating factor here for the Cyclones, is they want to try to make their record as good as possible here at the end of the year.
Derek, I'm going to go to you here. What's something that's really you're going to focus on in this matchup that could sway it one way or the other in this evenly matched team between the Rockets and the Cyclones?
I think the defensive fronts, I think, is going to be huge. And we about, Rochester's Connor Broughton and Xander Bridge and those guys getting pressure, being able to contain Cam Brinkman. Can they do that? And can they get to him enough to really bother him? To me is huge, because the SHG offensive line has really, once they've gotten healthy, has done a great job. And then, you reverse it, and the SHG kids, how can they get to whoever's back there at quarterback and, contain Caden Stout and all the different options? To me, I think a lot of it's going to be on the line to see where this one's at. And I just think, overall, as you look at it, and to piggyback off what Steve and Tim said, in terms of the records and everything, SHG quietly has just, snuck into the number 5 spot in the 4A rankings, to where, they lost to CBC by a ton in the first week, and everybody just kind of said, oh, they are, not the team or whatever. And then they really, I hope, kind of woke up some people last week with going to Chatham and doing what they did, showing that they're capable. And, just look at their resume since Cam Brinkman has taken over at quarterback, and it's impressive. So I really just, this one is interesting to me because I think that there might be some mistakes made based on the fact that, usually in this game, you kind of lean toward which team is senior dominated, and both of these teams are pretty junior heavy. So, which way do you go? You kind of say, well, SHG's at home, but it's tough to say. So I think that, this one might be like another classic where we see who has the ball last and who doesn't make that big mistake.
Tim, if SHG gets the victory, this will have happened. What's that one thing that will have happened if SHG that you're kind of circling?
Survive a very aggressive, and I mean very aggressive, Rochester defense. If they can find ways to score points against that Rochester D because of the fact that they're so aggressive, maybe they gamble a bit too much, I think that will be key in this game. And on the other side, SHG's got to get ready for J.P. Leonard and Tanner Beal at quarterback and all the guys that they have to work with. Derek Leonard does such a great job of moving people around and putting them in different spots on the field from series to series. It's got to drive the defensive coordinators nuts to play Rochester. So we'll see how that works out this week as well from the SHG defensive perspective.
Steve, same thing to you. Rochester wins this game because of what? What's the one or two things you have circled?
Well, Rochester is giving up right now. The defense is allowing about 99 rushing yards a game. Looks like SHG's offense is good for close to 195 rushing yards a game. So who has the advantage there? What unit overcomes that or holds closest to what their seasonal averages are? If the Rockets can limit that run game out of the Cyclones, they're a whole lot closer to winning than not. And to kind of echo Tim's statement about the coaching staff and the moving players around, by week 9, you've got shortcomings. You got kids banged up. You got things that have been working, haven't been working. So which coaching staff is able to pull off still some changes here on the last week of the regular season to overcome those shortcomings and kind of manage and scheme around where things still aren't quite going well? Whichever unit then again comes up with a couple of extra wins on that side of things, I think tilts the field just a little bit more to that favor. I suspect this will be a very close ball game by the time we're done broadcasting on Friday night.
Gentlemen, it's been a fun ride here in the regular season, the high school football preview show. Looking forward to the postseason talk. Look for us maybe popping on Saturday as well to break down the brackets. But for week 9, Tim, where can people hear the SHG call of the Rochester SHG game?
As always, it'll be a right down the middle call, Mike, and it'll be on Sports Radio 1450 AM and 92.3 FM, sportsradio1450.com, and the Sports Radio 1450 app.
Steve, for the Rochester Rockets broadcast?
97.7 FM, 970, and then on WMAY.com and that suite of apps that we all have here in the WMAY app, Mike, it'll be available.
Yes, and that's where the Glenwood Springfield High game will be at 9:70 a.m. on the app and online. And Derek, I have a feeling, will you be at the Rochester SHG game? I know last week you missed out.
Yeah, I'm not missing this one, I promise.
Excellent. Well, guys, appreciate the time as always, and looking forward to continuing us on next week as we enter into the postseason on the high school football preview show.
Catch the High School Football Preview Show live every Friday night at 6 on 97.7 and 970 WMAY. Listen to the podcast and watch the replay online at WMAY.com.